This episode is brought to you in part by Veeva Systems. Look, if you work at the site level, you know what a pain it can be to manage physical binders. It can even be a pain to have to use electronic systems that are owned and operated by the sponsors. So there's an opportunity now for sites to really invest in and take ownership over their e-reg. The greatest way to do that, in my opinion, is through SiteVault by Veeva. SiteVault gives research sites one place to work with sponsors to reduce the number of systems and logins used to run clinical trials. There's already 4,500 sites using SiteVault, which is a pretty insane number. We're using it ourselves. I find it incredibly intuitive and easy to use. Makes my job way easier. And on top of that, over 400 industry sponsors also use Veeva Clinical App applications, meaning that about 65% of global clinical trials already run on Veeva. So what are you waiting for? Head on over today to sites.veeva.com. This episode is also brought to you in part by Real-Time CTMS, a leading provider of innovative software solutions for clinical trial research sites, site networks, sponsors, and CROs. Real-time systems allow users to manage complex clinical research processes with powerful, user-friendly interfaces that are revolutionizing how research gets done. To get a free demo, check out the company's website at realtime-ctms.com and complete one of their contact forms. Hello and welcome to Note to File Podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. I'm your host, Brad Hightower. This week we have a rare double drop. I'm trying to make up for lost time here. But our guest this week is Archana Sah. Archana is a clinical development thought leader with extensive experience and passion for developing medicines for patients, having led and contributed to 15 FDA-EMEA drug approvals in oncology, Immuno-Oncology, precision therapeutics, rare diseases, metabolic diseases, and women's health. She's held various global positions within biotech and pharma, including with Genentech, Roche, Bayer Oncology, Johnson & Johnson, Icon, 2 oncology biotech startups, and a digital tech company, Medable, where she led Oncology TA Solutions. She is now the founder and CEO of AS Pharma Advisors and provides strategic advisory services to several organizations in clinical development and operations, innovations, and digital health technology. She's a recognized leader, passionate about bringing innovation and efficiencies within the entire clinical trial ecosystem as an advisor and a speaker. She's been the co-founding chair and now a member of the Society for Clinical Research Sites Oncology Board and chaired the Annual Oncology Summits. She serves on the Leadership Council for Decentralized Clinical Trials and Research Alliance and has been a member of the Digital Innovation and Oncology Roundtable with DIME. She also serves as an advisor to the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. She's contributed to clinical trial sites, Standardization and Harmonization with the Forum on Drug Discovery and Development, National Academy of Sciences. Clearly, a very accomplished woman. Had a great conversation, very honored to speak with her. This episode, we discussed the unique challenges of implementing DCT in oncology, the ever-present need for better interoperability, and what the next 5 years of DCT might look like. Without further ado, Archana Sah. All right. This week, welcome, Archana. Thank you so much for coming on. I hear you contribute a lot to the DTRA conversation, so I'm lucky to finally have you on.
Well, I'm so excited to be here, Brad. Thank you for the invitation. And I've been a follower of your Note to File podcast and also your often provocative LinkedIn posts, which I thoroughly enjoy, not only reading, but also engage with occasionally as appropriate. So thank you for having me here today.
I appreciate that. I'm going to jump right in. Like all of our other guests, I'm really curious to hear a little bit about sort of what brought you into the clinical trial space. So I think it's always really cool to hear people's sort of origin stories, if you will. So tell us a bit about your background and kind of, what led you into the clinical trial industry, if you would.
Yeah. So I, like many in our industry, so I actually originally grew up in India and did my undergrad in pharmacy and came to the United States as a graduate student to do my graduate studies in pharmacy here. And after that, I spent the first 9 years in the pharma corridor, initially in of New York, New Jersey, Boston area. And my interest in clinical research essentially started during my thesis work, which was a combination of pharmacokinetics and clinical research. I was looking at the safety and kinetic profile of certain molecules and was correlating that with the clinical efficacy in my thesis. And incidentally, the FDA was very interested in those molecules from their safety profiles at that time and had even used my thesis work in some of their guiding policy. So that kind of generated a lot of interest in wanting to do more in the clinical research area. And in addition, in my mind, clinical efficacy safety profile is the final frontier of any innovation that happens in the lab. So for me, I wanted to work in that final frontier where we submit the data to the FDA and other regulatory bodies to make them available to the patients. So I found that as a sweet spot for me, that I was very passionate about helping these patients through taking these innovations and making them available to the patients worldwide. So I started, as I mentioned earlier, I was not originally in oncology. Originally, my career was in the area of dermatology, women's health, metabolic diseases, those kinds of therapeutic areas, which I really enjoyed. And then, after about 9 years of working in that area, I happened to be introduced to my future to-be husband. He was on the West Coast in Seattle, and I was in New Jersey. And had it, not been for him, where, after we decided to get married, I resigned from my job with J&J. I was with J&J at that time on the East Coast, and I joined him in Seattle. And believe it or not, had that move not taken place, I probably would not have entered into oncology and stayed in those other therapeutic areas. And there was one other, interesting anecdote or incident that happened that sort of pushed me towards oncology as well. So when I arrived in the Seattle area to join my husband there, I had an offer from one of the top 4 or 5 medical devices company to join them. And at that time, we were starting a family, just about to start a family as well. So I had the job offer. I accepted it verbally, and then to my hiring manager, I shared that I was pregnant and that I would take the mandatory 3 months, which is in the United States, the regulation off. And to my surprise, I thought I was doing the right thing. They rescinded the offer. So I was literally
Wow.
shocked. And, being an immigrant and having just had my green card done by my previous employer, I was physically also pregnant, so not in a position to sort of pursue or question that. So I decided to take a year off, and I stayed home. I enjoyed my daughter's birth and her first smile, first walk, all of the first. And then once she was a year old, I decided to go back to work, and that's when I entered oncology. Because in Seattle at that time, there were a lot of biotechs burgeoning, and there was no big pharma or big biotech at that time, but there was an opportunity to start in the oncology area. And that's when I started my career in oncology. And I started with a company that was acquired by Bayer Oncology. It was their only outfit in oncology. And it gave me an opportunity to work on different molecules in breast cancer, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer areas. But unfortunately, within a year of working with them, the Germans, they came down to Seattle one day, Bayer executives, and they said, "We are shutting down our Seattle office and we're going to move everybody to New Jersey. So you're welcome to come join." I had just left New Jersey to be with my husband. So I respectfully just declined that. And I then joined a startup for another startup where I got an opportunity to work on several molecules, and again in different therapeutic areas, including prostate cancer, lung cancer. We did some DLBCL, so myelomas, non-Hodgkin's lymphomas. I was with them for about 4.5 years or so. And, my husband and I, we were both sort of first people in our families to sort of come here. So the only place we could afford when we started a family was in the boonies, and I had a very long commute. So that got to me after 5 years. And to a point where my doctor said I needed to cut down or eliminate my commute. And that's when I decided to take a home-based position. And at that time, which is very different from today's post-COVID world, no big pharma would allow you to do full-time roles in an executive, senior position from home. So only CROs allowed that. So I joined a CRO at that time called Icon Clinical Research, and I was supporting one of their key leaders, Cindy, in helping set up the Oncology Center of Excellence for them. So that opportunity really, I'm glad I did that role because it really gave me that 360 sort of different perspective. Being on the CRO side, what are their challenges? How do you work with pharmas, top 5 pharmas, and understand I had already spent so much time on the sponsor side, but I really enjoyed that role because I was able to understand the other side of the table, so to speak, as well, and incorporate that into, I found banking on that several times throughout my career after that as well, to understand the client, to understand and how to partner better, how to find solutions, be solution oriented, in so to speak. So I was working with this global CRO, and at that time, my husband decided to move to the Bay Area when he changed his jobs, and that brought us to San Francisco Bay Area about almost 12 years ago. And while I was still in Seattle, I had opportunities and offers from several pharma companies on the West Coast, mostly in the Bay Area and Los Angeles area. I wasn't able to accept those offers because my husband wasn't ready to move. But now that he was moving, we moved here, and I was, approached by a recruiter from Genentech Roche for their therapeutic area leader oncology role. And I really, since they had offered me a job earlier while I was in Seattle and I had not accepted it, this time when they offered again and I was already in the Bay Area, it made sense to go ahead and join them. And I'm so thankful for that opportunity because it really, I was with them for about 5 years. And in those 5 years, I was able to bring 10 drugs, almost 12 drugs to the market through approval. We had a large team, some here in the US, some in Canada. Globally, of course, we were in 60 plus countries working on. So I worked all on oncology while at Genentech Roche. So all my work has been in that area. And I feel so incredibly fortunate to be able to bring these drugs to approval while at Genentech. And truly the meaning of impacting millions and millions of lives became real while working for them, because the rate at which it was during the boom of the immuno-oncology space. So we had hundreds of trials going on at any time with these immuno-oncology drugs, combination trials, as well as monotherapy trials. And we were bringing innovation even right at that time. I remember, like, decentralized clinical trials have become big post-COVID, or during COVID, so to speak. But we were doing innovative things that you could label as decentralized, techniques even back then. And we were, doing home health nurses. We were deploying these different apps for the patients. We were taking patient-centered, feedbacks in our designs, as well as study coordinators and investigators' feedbacks, KOL feedbacks, of course, from that perspective. But also, I would always encourage my teams to talk to the study coordinators, show them the protocol, see whether it's feasible to sort of road test it before we finalize a protocol and execute it on them. And that was also where I also took, seriously my volunteer roles in the industry. That was my way of giving back to the industry. I was, asked by Christine Peer of SCRS, the founder of SCRS, to help co-found and set up their oncology board. And I did that role for 3 years. And, it was very difficult to see Christine pass away during, literally 3 months before our very first annual SCRS Oncology Summit. We started this unique, conference in the industry, which purely focuses on what are the operational challenges. How can sites, sponsors, CROs, and vendor providers in the unique oncology space come together, understand each other's challenges better, partner better together? And so we started that first ever conference in the industry literally a month after Christine passed away. And it has been a successful event where everybody has really enjoyed, because at ASCO and ASH and all those other meetings, ESMO, etc., we talk about the scientific advances, but what about the advances from an operational perspective? How can we partner better together? How can we bring efficiencies into how we conduct these trials? That's really the focus of the SCRS Oncology Oncology Summits. So, and during that time, I also got an opportunity to work for the National Academy of Sciences in helping develop their global national policy for sites, standardization of practices for sites. And I also got to volunteer for American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network on different policy level and different initiatives. How do we impact enrollment? How do we impact more diversity and inclusion? And I'm also very thankful for that time I got to work on a global initiative at Genentech called Inclusive Research. And we were looking at how do we improve the participation of different diverse groups. My diversity, it can be ethnic diversity, socioeconomic diversity, sexual diversity, all of that into representing the patients that are enrolling into our trials with the prevalence of the disease. So that was a great opportunity as well. So I was with them for that time, and then I got a great opportunity at another startup to set up and head up their oncology clinical operations group. So I joined another startup as head of their clinical operations and reporting into the CEO. That I spent almost 2 years with them and brought few molecules through the IND phase. And also another, it was a great partnership with two companies at that time. One molecule was with AbbVie, the other was with Gilead. And that's when I also found myself banking on a lot of that partnership experience that I had learned. How do we partner better through when I played the role at the CRO on the CRO side. So that also came handy, and opportunity to set up my own team, bring these molecules. Two of them were first-in-class molecules into the clinical space, IND within 18 months, and then the dose escalation as well as expansion started within 6 months. Those were unheard of. The board was really happy with the work that we did. And that's when I got a call from Medable, and that brought me to Medable to help set up their oncology solutions. So that was my first foray, 100% into a technology company, and really enjoyed, putting together the solutions for the company, which was very focused on the oncology, which was really geared around what are the unique challenges, in the oncology space, and how do we bring these digital and decentralized solutions to target those challenges for different clients at Medable. So, defining therapeutically effective workflow solutions for different disease groups. And we really focused on the patient experience, as well as the site engagement. And of course, the most important, the endpoint collections that we were helping our clients with. So that was, really a good time being, lead the vision and the go-to-market strategy for deployment in the oncology space with the solutions. Just in summer this year, I decided, I transitioned from a full-time role with Medable to an advisor role with Medable. So now I still work with the teams to help advise them. But I set up my own advisory company this year in summer, and it's called AS Pharma Solutions. And this helps me advise multiple companies and help multiple stakeholders in this area to, on topics ranging from clinical development for oncology or other therapeutic areas, since I've done other therapeutic areas as well. And also digital health area, how do we bring innovation into accelerating bringing these drugs to the patients faster? So I'm really enjoying that space, to be very honest. This year is my 30 years of working in the industry in full-time roles. So I feel like I have earned my place and moved to advisory roles for companies. So I'll pause there for, that was a lengthy introduction. But, I hope my journey, by sharing this journey, your audience will help understand how this is all built up into my desire to, as the next phase, to be an advisor, having done the 360, of all this, and also given back continuously in volunteer roles to the industry, having built that name brand in the industry. I hope I'm able to use this new position now as an advisor in the industry to help companies solve their problems and challenges.
Yeah, I love the, breadth of experience. Obviously the depth as well, but having come from pharma to some CRO experience and then working with sites through, SCRS and some of your other work there. I think it's obviously a huge advantage to have that, sort of different perspective, which I think sometimes is easy to overlook, right? Like, we often see, I'm guilty of it myself. I've been at the site level my whole career, so it's easy to get sort of tunnel vision, in whichever stakeholder you happen to be working for at any given time. But especially now, I think it's more important than ever to, really be able to consider all those different perspectives. I think that's something that's just uncommon in terms of having that breadth of perspective. So I think that's obviously a huge benefit to you. Give you a
Mhm.
lot of kudos for that.
Yeah. And I found it useful because, I can always then place my foot into the shoes of the other person, of the other stakeholder I'm working with, and think of the problem or the challenge from their perspective. So that helps me devise the solutions much better, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and something you touched on, throughout your experience is that, and I'm sort of tying this into where we are today. I mean, there's
Mhm.
obviously, no escaping the DCT sort of fever pitch, if you
Mhm.
will, that it
Yeah.
seems like is sort of going on. And you've alluded to the fact that, we've always sort of had or used, maybe not always, but for quite some time, a lot of these debatably DCT methods have been, involved in clinical research. I mean, why do you think now we're seeing such a just crazy proliferation of vendors sort of come out of the woodworks to sort of jump into the DCT space when,
Mhm.
again, a lot of these things have already, sort of existed or already existed in the
Yeah.
clinical trial space? Why now?
I think when they existed before, a lot of them were in the pilot stage, like we would have lots of pilots being here, started here and there. Like, so now we are moved from that pilot stage to going to how do we upscale this? How do we scale this up for large portfolio of work, So, and that's where the huge opportunity is as well. And the one of the biggest reasons why we are now seeing more proliferation is also the COVID. During COVID, we actually saw a lot of these being utilized very successfully in accelerating vaccine research, in accelerating, and keeping the trials open. The regulatory world came together, the pharma world came together, the patients, benefited from that in seeing these vaccines developed in unprecedented timeframes. So that when, it's almost like now we have tasted that success, we want to do not go back to the old poor way of working. We want to keep some of those efficiencies that we developed, and that has really caused a lot of proliferation of these vendors that are providing these solutions. Now, I'll be honest, in my review of all the vendors out there, I don't think there's today any one vendor that has it all. There are vendors that are really great in one area, but perhaps not, in all the areas. And so I think that's where the opportunity is. That's what drives and fuels this growth and this need for multiple different vendors to jump into this space. And the market is ripe. The patients are demanding it, the sites are demanding it, and the market is ripe. So the market has answered.
Yeah, and they've certainly answered. There's no shortage, it seems like, of vendors right now. Again, it's very interesting. I'll say exciting, but also a little anxiety-inducing time if you're at a site too, with all the different solutions kind of coming forward. But something you touched on in your introduction that I kind of want to dig down deeper into is. Obviously COVID, and especially with the COVID trials, we saw a lot of this stuff. What do you think is unique in the oncology space? I know you spent a lot of time there.
Mhm.
Something obviously have a lot of experience in. What are some sort of unique challenges in oncology in bringing more of these sort of digital or DCT methods?
Yeah, well, that's such a great question. Thank you for that. Because even when I was doing this as a full-time role at Medable, often when talking to clients, there was a range of these challenges depending on whether I was talking to a big pharma client or whether I was talking to a mid-market client or a small mom and pop startup, with perhaps one or two molecules. Their challenges were different, and I will be honest, their challenges were very different. Some, for a large pharma, we were talking about portfolio level deployment of these solutions, and their challenges were, well, global. Like, how do we scale this globally in when I have this trial placed in 60 countries or 30 countries with 60 plus language needs, interoperability, provision of devices. I think we ran into instances where there were some countries where the IRBs would not allow us to give these iPhones and iPads to the patients because of the social determinants of health reasons. So those were different kinds of challenges. Plus, interoperability is another huge unmet need. I think that's not unique to oncology. That happens in other therapeutic areas, but in oncology, the fundamental thing you have to remember is these are usually elderly patients. These are sick and fragile patients. So real-time monitoring of their safety and tolerability, for by what I mean by tolerability is how well is the patient tolerating the medications they are being given, plus the treatment plus the concomitant medications to manage their adverse events. How well are they tolerating it? Does the dose need to be reduced? Does a patient need to take a week off break from the treatment? All of that is very unmet needs, so to speak, and that's where I see huge potential in these digital health technologies, real-time patient monitoring technologies, to not only help the site from the nurse to all the way to the principal investigator, to help them in their clinical decisions of helping manage these patients. One of the key things Dr. Pastor said in one of the webinars I remember attending of the FDA is the number one job of an oncologist is to manage the safety and tolerability of the medication to the patient. Otherwise, radiologists would be prescribing these drugs and not oncologists, right? So when you put that in context, I think the challenges that stayed across all the three levels, whether it was big pharma, mid market, or small biotech, how are these companies deploying these technologies to reduce the number of visits that the patient has to come to the site, so reduce the travel burden of these sick and fragile patients, was number one challenge that we wanted to solve. Number two, it was we wanted to make sure these sites, because these oncology trials are so complex. I don't have to tell you this, Brad, you know this better. They are so complex. The processes are so complex. The workflows are complex. How can we reduce the site burden? We want to reduce the multiple entry of data points. There is imaging, there is biomarker testing, there is lab testing, there is a whole host of tests going on. I mean, on average, in an oncology trial, we collect 3.2 billion data points per study compared to 1.9 billion data points for a non-oncology study. So you can just, see the scope of how much data is being collected for each patient. So that was the other challenge we wanted to, how do we develop solutions and partner with the right companies where we are able to reduce the site burden for the sites. And number three, using these sensors, for real-time safety monitoring, at least even simple basic sensors, to help monitor the patient real time, toxicity, for example. It's very common in a lot of oncology drugs. Can you use remote ECG collection? Can you to monitor these patients? So we bring these patients in oncology trials just for their vitals. I really, I want to say this on your show today for all your audience. Patients should no longer have to come in to these oncology patients should no longer have to come in just for vital measurements. We want these protocols to give the flexibility and optionality to the patient that they can go to a nearby pharmacy if sensors are not deployed or the sensors and interoperability is not there yet developed. Go to the nearby pharmacy to get that done. Go to your primary care physician to get that done. Have home health nurse sent to the patients. Give that optionality to the patient. Not all patients are comfortable having nurses visit them in their homes. Especially oncology patients, with a immunocompromised situation that they are in, they don't want infections coming into the home. So give that optionality to the patient. I think that's the huge burden that we were focused on solving for. And ECOAS, we talk about ECOAS a lot in the decentralized space. It's no longer the FDA, the EMEA, all of these regulatory bodies have made it very clear. It's no longer only sufficient for pharma to show overall survival as the endpoint. Along with that, it's so important that they also show that the patient's journey through the treatment and post-treatment is also the quality of life that is not impacted in a very negative way as well. So I think making sure that we are solving for that need where what the regulatory bodies are asking for, what is right for in the patient's outcomes, because all of that impacts ultimate patient outcome. If the patient is not tolerating the treatment better, they're going to drop off from the study. The sponsor is going to lose that data, and that's, it's going to only delay the completion of the enrollment of that data. So I think those were some of the important challenges we were solving for and continue to solve for. And finally, I think the elevated level, there were some pharmas that were much far ahead and advanced, and where they were deploying AI and ML technologies to analyze the data collected through decentralized techniques to, in real time, manage the dosage. Is the dose correct? Do we need to reduce it? So manage the tolerability, coming back to that point from Dr. Pazder again. So I think those are some of the topmost challenges that I noticed and continue to notice. And one of the things, the whole point when I think you invited me to come to Notifile today was, I think I had commented in one of your LinkedIn posts that it's really important to solve all of this. Interoperability between the systems is so important. If you were to ask me today, Brad, what's the number one challenge for all of these vendors and all of the, in the clinical trial space, I will say it is interoperability. A company that solves this is going to be the winner, because there are so many systems out there, and today we don't have that solution. So that's an unmet need, burning unmet need, so to speak, in our industry. It impacts sites, it impacts patients, it impacts sponsors, no matter what kind of sponsors, CROs, all of the above.
Yeah, we definitely feel it at the site level. When we're, to your point, doing a lot of duplicate data entry or working across systems that don't communicate in any way with each other. And I've always considered site and patient sort of in the same boat to a large degree. Obviously not entirely, but sites are doing all they can to sort of work with patients through their journey in a clinical trial, and we want them to stay on trial. We want it to be easy for them, the same way that what we're trying to accomplish through DCT. So, interoperability aside, to what degree or what role perhaps do you see the sites having, as these methods become more well adopted? I mean, right now it feels again like there's a lot of vendor pressure, so to speak, but ultimately, the PI is responsible,
Yes.
and these are their patients. To what degree do you feel that again sites may take some responsibility or start incorporating these things into their workflow on their own without necessarily being handed to them by a sponsor, which is still, really the case primarily across all types of trials, not just oncology. But
Yeah.
I mean, where do you sort of see that going, or will it continue to sort of be driven by industry, do you think?
So, I'm of the school of thought that for long term, because we need solutions that are long term, that are sustainable, that's going to keep these sites afloat. It's not one and done sites where they will, I'm of the school of thought that I think the sites should be investing in these technologies, especially some of the basic ones like, e-consent technology, shipping of drugs to the patients, home health nurses, all of these. I think these are some examples that sites should be investing in. And at the same time, I want to also say that sponsors and CROs should be allowing sites to utilize those technologies in the trials that they approach these sites to run. Because unless those two both happen, we will not have a successful long-term survival and long-term sustainable solution that we are talking about that's needed. So I really feel that, to be honest, let's get the technology to a point where interoperability is solved for. And then once the systems are talking to each other, there's no longer should be a reason for pharma to demand that sites only use what they are offering to the sites. That argument goes out of the window once we have solved for the problem of interoperability. I personally believe that's one of the sustainable solutions that we do need in our industry. Some sites may be very resistant to deploying these technologies. I think sites should be very vested in educating themselves. I know you do a good job educating your site, but I think other sites could take lessons from your success of your sites, where how they should be learning about these technologies, picking the right technology to purchase and buy, invest in, and then having partnership oriented based discussions with sponsors and CROs to allow them to use these solutions that they're investing in. And along with that, we need these vendors that are developing these solutions to solve for interoperability. And then we'll have a successful, less friction amongst these different stakeholders, so to speak. I think sites should also be investing in analyzing their data. I mean, there is so much you guys should be should you can market yourself better to your sponsors and CROs, and thereby demand more reimbursement and demand more cost. This because once you understand your data better, once you understand your community that you are treating and what sort of patients you are seeing, you're able to have. I remember at Genentech, at every quarter, we would analyze the performance of every site that we worked with. And we would literally, when my CRA team would go out to those sites, they would share that performance metrics with the sites. So it was educational, but it also helped the sites know what they're doing well and what they can improve upon. Like, how are they doing in startup timelines? How are they doing in enrollment? How are they doing in diversity enrollment? So all of the above, you guys also sit on a ton of data that you can perhaps spend a little bit more time analyzing and marketing yourself better with the sponsors, and that will give you the power to demand things that you are in a stronger position to demand things of your sponsors when you have that powerful data that you can bank on.
Yeah, no, a lot of great points there. I mean, to your point, I think a lot of sites aren't that sophisticated, when it comes. I've been guilty of this, myself, even though I sort of like to think that I'm more of a forward-thinking, member of the site community. But it occurred to me the other day that, I'm on LinkedIn and talking about this stuff, but a lot of your average study coordinator has no idea what
Mhm.
DCT means or is.
Mhm.
A lot of
Mhm.
them don't. So I do think it's still going to require a lot of education on the site side for sure, especially to continue to get more buy-in from the site level. Because again, to your point, sites can be just as resistant about new things. But
Mhm.
I've also experienced, situations where we've tried to work with sponsors to implement some solutions that would make patients' lives easier, make our lives easier, sort of in the DCT space. And even sponsors still remain risk averse in some of
Yeah.
these instances as well. So it still feels like there's just enough disconnect in some cases that it's been
Yeah.
challenging to sort of find that
Yeah.
nice middle ground, right? Like it's
Yeah.
we haven't quite turned that key yet, I guess, but I guess that's why we're having these conversations, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I remember when at Genentech we used, at the SCRS summits, we would hold these closed door meetings with sites. These were called the workshops that we would hold with sites, where only sites were allowed to come in, and we would present our portfolio, our incoming portfolio of work. So that gave visibility to those sites of what is coming from Genentech Roche, and then we would also talk to them about what's working at Roche with you and what's not working. And believe me, those sites left like they didn't shy. They were very blunt. They told us what's not working, and what you are calling out is exactly one of the things they would tell us, in those workshops at these SCRS summits. So I know the sponsors are hearing it. I think I encourage the leaders to do something and not just hear it, but go back and solve for it, is what I would leave, with your audience today. Is it's the value of those feedback that the sites are opening up and giving to you, not only at those summits, but also all along. When you post on LinkedIn, that's also considered as a feedback from the site. Invest in educating these sites, invest in hearing their feedback and solving for it. Partner with them. Partnership is another keyword that I would, want your audience to walk away with today. In addition to interoperability, solving for that is how do you partner better with the sites is another message today.
That even just that phrasing alone can change things, I think, because I've noticed oncology's still a relatively new therapeutic area for us. We've worked across just about everything. We're obviously in oncology pretty heavily now, but it does seem like sponsors take more of a partnership type relationship than they do across some other therapeutic areas.
Oh,
And I
totally.
don't know. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's something, maybe other areas could learn from oncology, because if it's simply like a employee employer relationship, then things can get sideways pretty quick,
Yeah,
if it's merely transactional. And,
yeah, yeah.
if your study is not well designed or some of the tech is funky and you're not listening to sites, I'll move on to the next study.
Yeah,
that's going to listen and is going to work with us more as a partner. And I think that's sometimes
yeah,
underappreciated by some sponsors, because sites, to go back to earlier, a lot of sites we don't have a lot of extra cash laying around to
yeah, yeah.
spin our wheels, so they're going to go where things can get done and we can be treated more like partners. I think that's really maybe subtle but important difference that I've
Oh,
seen across,
totally.
especially
Yeah.
oncology, where there does seem to be a lot more, just a lot more of a two-way relationship.
It is, and the marketplace has demanded it because if you look at clinicaltrials.gov, almost 60 to 70% of trials listed there are in oncology. So there is a
Right.
plethora of oncology trials open. There's a lot more competition for these patients. In fact, today I can tell you, there's a statistic out there that shows that there are more oncology trials open than there are actual patients diagnosed with cancer. So the competition is really high, and see, the marketplace is driven. So we have to value how to better partner with sites, better partner with patients. Otherwise, these trials never enroll. I mean, it's the fact there are more oncology trials open than patients with cancer diagnosis.
Oh, that's crazy. That is a crazy
Yeah.
statistic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and to that point too, maybe we need better access. I mean, that's it, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's just not easy enough way
Yeah.
for patients to get involved in these trials. So, I
Yeah.
mean, what do you think what does the next 5 years look like in terms of digital technology or DCT at this point?
Yeah, I think we'll definitely see some consolidation amongst vendors. There's just way too many out there, and each one doing parts of things great, but not all of the things great. So I think we'll definitely see some consolidation coming up. We'll also see more optionality being provided. If we solve for interoperability within the next 5 years, I see a transformation. And I truly mean that word. I see a transformation coming up in terms of how these trials are run, where they are run, how we are addressing the burden on the patients, the burden on the sites, the speed with which these drugs will get approved, all of the above. And leveraging of the data is another big thing. These in addition to these decentralized and digital health technologies being deployed, data and data leveraging is going to be huge and key for the way we do clinical trials and the way we do clinical research in general. I mean, to me, that the amount of data that we are collecting, I think it doubles every year, or something. I can't remember the exact metric, but I think it's predicted that the amount of meaningful data that's available will continue to double each year for analysis. So think about it. Sponsors and CROs could be sitting on data today that could be analyzed to maybe for label extensions already, real world data. I mean, that's the amount of data that we are sitting on. So I think my prediction is that patient data is going to be highly valuable. The amount of data and the explosion of the data that we have, we're going to need to harvest that data that will help from anything from designing the trial correctly to executing it at the right places to influencing patient outcomes, better patient outcomes. At the end of the day, everything has to come back to the patient and the experience of the patient, the outcome of the patient. So I think a lot of these digital processes and the workflows will ensure the data can flow from one point to the other easily, and thereby in a real-time setting help drive clinical decisions and lead to better patient outcomes. I think there is no going back from what we have seen, the progress we have made from the vaccine and the COVID experience. I feel, the patient is going to benefit from this, the sites are going to benefit from this, and ultimately the sponsors and CROs are going to benefit because they are going to be able to deploy these better and bring more and more drugs to the market faster. And finally, I think one of the saddest part of a lot of innovation, and just today the AACR came out with this report, even though there are so many innovations in oncology and other therapeutic areas happening, the cancer mortality rates continue to decline, but challenges are still remaining. And those challenges we see are mostly to do with these innovations not reaching the racial and ethnic minorities and other medically underserved populations living in the rural areas and those belonging to sexual and gender minorities. So there's disproportionate burden of cancer as we speak, as so to speak, that is going to have to change. And I want to urge the listeners here to continue to keep that at the center. Just as we think of the patient at the center, you have to think of all patients, not just the typical male white patient. You have to think of all these diversities that I just mentioned, so that we are able to bring these innovations to all patients that are in need of these medicines and not just those. So access is going to be another huge thing in the next 5 years. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I could not agree more. And as we sort of get towards the end, let me ask you this: do you feel that there needs to be perhaps a change or maybe more clear regulatory guidance to really fully institute some of these changes? I mean, I still feel like there's I know at the site level, we're used to getting beaten up by CRA or you do things this certain way and that's how they're done, and we often feel sort of boxed in by that. And I think maybe part of the issue is that regulation or regulatory guidance isn't always super clear, right? So it leaves maybe too much gray at times. Do you feel like that's the case? Does there need to be more clear, direct regulatory guidance to really help sort of push this through?
I think so. I think there is room for regulatory guidance to be improved, and remove ambiguity is the key word here.
Yeah.
I will underscore that, because the way these guidances are interpreted is so variable, and people are always CYAing themselves, so to speak, so that in case there is an audit, we have to CYA ourselves, and they do so much more burdensome work. So I think we need clearer and less ambiguous guidances. Even the Diversity Act and the Depict Act, I think there is language in there that can go still a little further. And I remember being one of those courageous audience in one of the FDA webinars I was attending, where I literally asked the FDA people who wrote those guidances draft, and I said, why have you not explicitly called this out very clearly? And the answer, like, for example, for diversity, how do we improve diversity in these? The guidances didn't call out for DCT, using decentralized techniques and tools. And I questioned them, and the answer was, well, we didn't want to, be prescriptive to the sponsors and CROs, but we wanted to leave it vague enough that they understood what we are asking. So we leave it up to them what technique they want to use, but this is the end goal, which I think is good. But what I fear is, it's not, unless it's prescriptive sometimes, people don't really implement it the way FDA wants them to implement it. So, one of the good things is I said, help get to participate in those ACS-CAN meetings, American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network meetings. And as part of that it gives me an opportunity to contribute and to some of the language that propose, for example, to these kind of regulations. So, and I think with the COVID, even the FDA has learned, I would say, and the EMEA and other regulatory bodies, that there is a lot of room for improvement. If they were able to change the rules overnight. Remember, they changed it within a week overnight when COVID hit. Sure enough, they can bring that flexibility and that mindset approach to making these regulations more patient-friendly, site-friendly. Think critically about why we are doing this. Why does the IRB, like, for example, with these ePros, does the IRB need screenshots of every single page? No, it doesn't. So
Right.
even simple things like that, I think there's room for the FDA and other regulatory bodies to be prescriptive. We want them to be prescriptive in certain places, because the harm of not being prescriptive is far more than the benefit of being prescriptive there. So I really feel, and with the Depict Act, I think that's going to hopefully empower the FDA to almost like a carrot and stick approach, where if there is not enough diversity in the trials that have been enrolled and submitted for, the FDA has been empowered, or will be empowered once it's enacted, to force the sponsor to run those phase 4 trials with that desired diversity that's needed. So I think the progressive thoughts are there. We want to continue on that path and encourage these regulatory bodies to listen and partner and make it prescriptive where it's needed. We want you to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I think it's, we're still, at site level, at least, there's still arguments about some very basic things in regulatory guidance from FDA that, again, to your point, I mean, they could they could shore that up anytime they wanted to if they would
Yeah.
go out on a limb a little bit more and not be afraid of being a little more prescriptive. And unfortunately, it can grind progress to a standstill if people are still arguing over very basic issues. So I hate that that's the case oftentimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, again, I mean, Archana, I want to thank you so much for coming on. Where can people reach out to you online?
Yeah, so people can reach me on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Twitter, my handle is Archana Sah USA, and LinkedIn, you can search for Archana Sah. And my company, you can reach out to me for my advisory services. My email is archana.sah@aspharmaadvisors.com. Again, feel free to include this in your note to file as well. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to, hopefully utilizing all this experience and knowledge and advocacy for sites, advocacy for patients, helping promote partnership between sponsors, CROs, vendors, sites, patients to move the needle and, impact this, help these companies in solving the challenges that they're trying to solve for. And kudos to all the work that the sites do, because without the sites and these patients who participate in these trials, we wouldn't have any of these medicines available to us today. So I would want to call out, all the sites and all the patients and all the investigators. And I also want to take a moment while doing this podcast to thank all of my team members that I've worked with throughout my career, to help bring all these medicines to the patients that we have impacted along the journey. So thank you all. Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and I continue to look forward to continue to impact these patients through advisory roles now. Yeah.
No, that's beautiful. Well, I'll make sure that we drop your contact info in the show notes. And again, thanks so much for coming on, Archana.
Thank you for this opportunity, Brad.
As always, thank you so much for listening to the Note to File podcast. Please make sure and check out our website, notetofilepodcast.com, for interview transcripts, our guest contact information, as well as a collection of our live streams. Make sure and check us out weekly. We live stream to YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn, so please come be part of the conversation. Thank you guys so much.